Welcome to another tutorial video. We're going to be discussing the topic of pensions, and specifically unfunded pension liabilities or unfunded pension obligations in enterprise value, valuation multiples, and accounting in this tutorial. So if you want the full Excel files, the screenshots, and the written guide, you can go to this URL. I will pin this as the first comment below the video as well. I think it is quite helpful to actually see a lot of this executed in Excel for a topic as technically complex as this one is. I'm going to start with the short version, spend a few minutes on it, and then if you want more details on the valuation, the accounting, or to see a specific example of one company, Michelin here, and how you apply these rules to that company, you can keep watching. Let's start by defining what exactly pensions are, and specifically defined benefit pensions. The basic idea is that an employee works at a company for a certain number of years, and then after they retire, the company promises specific payments to them based on how many years they worked there, and then what they earned on average during their time at the company. So for example, maybe the monthly pension check in retirement equals 1% times the number of years the employee worked there times their average monthly salary over that time, maybe adjusted for inflation or something like that. So let's say that they worked at the company for 20 years, they earned about $10,000 per month during that time. 1% times 20 times $10,000 per month equals $2,000 per month. So this would be their pension benefit payment in retirement, assuming that they stayed at the company until retirement. Now, the purpose of a defined benefit pension is to encourage long-term employment, to get employees to stay at their companies for longer and to commit. Sometimes pensions can make up for lower salaries, so maybe a company can't be competitive with salaries in the current market, but it can offer higher pensions than other companies. Also, pensions are ostensibly to take care of retirement for employees, although as we know, terms can change, conditions can change, and so sometimes this last part ends up not being quite true. Now, when it comes to valuation and enterprise value and valuation multiples, the most important points with pensions are as follows. First of all, you really only care about defined benefit pensions that promise to pay specific amounts to employees. So the 401k plans that are popular in the US and other defined contribution plans do not factor in at all. If you look at the financial statements for these types of items, they're usually just listed as simple expenses on the income statement, and they don't even have matching assets or liabilities on the balance sheet, so they really don't factor into these calculations at all. If you are dealing with a defined benefit pension and it is underfunded, in other words, the pension liabilities exceed the pension assets, so the amount that is owed in the future exceeds what the company has set aside to pay for it, then you normally add that amount, and if the contributions into the pension plan are tax deductible for the company, you multiply by 1 minus the tax rate. When you are calculating valuation multiples, you want to make sure that the pension service cost is deducted in metrics that pair with enterprise value, such as EBIT and EBITDA and unlevered free cash flow. But you do not want to deduct the financial components like the interest or the expected return or the various amortization and adjustment line items to the pension plan itself, because those are considered financial rather than operational in nature. So those are the most important points. And if you want to see some examples of this, I have in the Excel file here this example for Michelin. And essentially what we do is in the enterprise value bridge, we start with the diluted equity value, we subtract cash and the other items, we add debt, preferred stock, all the other normal line items. And then for unfunded pensions, we take the number, multiply by 1 minus the tax rate, and overall, it boosts the enterprise value by roughly 10%, just under 10%. And then in the metrics like EBIT and EBITDA, for example, we take the financial components related to the pension and add them back here so that only the service cost is deducted in EBIT and EBITDA. Those are the basics, but I think it is helpful to understand a bit of the intuition as well. The reason you do all this is because unfunded pensions normally count as debt-like liabilities because the employees are effectively acting as investors in the company. So they're accepting a lower salary today so the company can keep operating in exchange for higher payments in the future later on after they retire. Another reason you do this is because unfunded pensions tend to imply that the company will have to raise additional capital in the future, either debt or equity or both, to actually pay the benefits to the employees. The financial components associated with the pension correspond to the underfunded or unfunded portion. And so you add the unfunded portion in enterprise value and you exclude the associated expenses from metrics that pair with enterprise value. That's about all you need to know for entry-level interviews, in my opinion. pensions obviously get a lot more complicated, but I think that specific questions about the accounting treatment and the exact line items and advanced adjustments are quite unlikely. Pensions are more of an on-the-job topic because automation tools and data tools like Capital IQ frequently get pensions completely wrong, or they just ignore them in the metrics and multiples. Pensions are also more important if you work with old school companies, such as those in the industrials or manufacturing or airline sectors. So if you want to learn about this topic in a bit more depth, in the rest of this lesson, I will cover the following points. First, I'll go through some sample calculations and math for Michelin. Then we'll go into the bizarro world of pension accounting, and you'll see a little bit more about how the pension asset and liability work and how these items appear on the income statement and cash flow statement. And then I will say a few words about pensions in a DCF analysis and some other adjustments you might make in that context. So let's get started with the example for Michelin. Now, for context, I have created a separate version of the Excel file here without anything for pensions entered right now. And currently, the company's EBIT multiple is 7.1x, the EBITDA multiple is about 4.4x, just for reference. The first step here is that you normally want to go to the annual filing report and search for a term like pension or pension plan or pension plan assets and get the all-inclusive numbers from there. If the total pension liabilities exceed the total pension assets, then you want to add that and multiply by 1 minus the tax rate because pension plan contributions are tax deductible in France. So let's go into Excel and look at this. I'm going to bring up the PDF with excerpts from Michelin's most recent annual filing, and I'll just search for pension right here. And if we scroll down, you can see that here they have a couple different components. They have what they call the funded plans, where there's a minimal difference between the pension liabilities and the pension assets. And then they have these unfunded obligations here. But what really matters is the total number. The net defined benefit obligation, they're simply adding up everything here and saying that it comes out to about 2.3 billion euros. And they're breaking it out a little bit differently. They're showing where specifically it shows up in the balance sheet down here. But what matters is the total number. So let's go into Excel and enter this 2.346 billion. And I'll multiply by 1 minus the 25% tax rate right up there, and we have that. Now the next step is that you want to search for service costs and make sure that it is deducted in operating income and all the metrics that are based on operating income, but that the financial components are not. Now normally this should be the case, but companies can do very strange things, and so you can't always take them at face value. So if I search for service costs right now, you can see if we scroll down a ways on this next page, page 7 of this PDF, they're saying right here that these specific items are recognized in operating income. There's the current service cost, the actuarial gains or losses, plan modifications, and then other items. We have a problem because yes, we do want the current service costs to be deducted in operating income, but we don't want these actuarial gains or losses or any of these other line items there. So what we should do is go back and go down to where we've calculated EBIT and EBITDA, and right in non-recurring charges, I can just add back the 9 and the 14. And I'm doing that because we're specifically removing or adding back the actuarial losses, and then also doing the same thing for other items. These are both negative and they reduce the company's operating income, so we're adding them back to specifically exclude them and make sure that only the operational components are there. Now, if you look at the overall impact here, the multiples shift by a little bit. The EBIT multiple was closer to 7 before. The EBITDA multiple was, I believe, 4.4. So they both increase as a result of these changes, although it's not really a dramatic difference. It is decently noticeable here because, as I showed you before, the unfunded pensions are just under about 10% of the company's enterprise value. So they can make a difference in this context. So let's now go into pension accounting so you can understand a little bit more about the rationale for all this. The two most important points are the pension plan asset and the pension plan liability. And I'm going to bring up an Excel file once again with these. It's on the separate tab here, pension_ACCT. With the pension plan asset, the way it normally works is that the company allocates a certain amount of funds to pay for the pension obligations in the future. They invest these funds into stocks and bonds and private credit and whatever else is out there. They earn a return on them, and then they add that return to the pension plan assets. They also contribute something to keep funding these. Sometimes the participants, the employees, also have to contribute something. And then when they pay benefits, they pay them out of these plan assets. So they sell some of their investments to fund the payments. And so all those components affect the plan assets. Now, on the liability side, some of those also factor in. For example, contributions from the employees will increase the liability, and then benefit payments reduce the liability because when they pay out something, they now owe less in the future. But there are these two other components here, the service cost and the interest cost, and then actuarial gains or losses related to changing the terms of the plan or how the mechanics work, for example. With the service cost, the idea here is that this represents how employees work more hours over time, how their salaries generally increase over time, and how as they spend more time working at the company, the obligation to pay those employees in retirement will also increase. The interest cost represents how the company gets closer in time to its benefits payments as each year passes, so the pension liability becomes larger and larger due to the time value of money. The pension liability, roughly speaking, is the present value of all the benefit payments they're going to make in the future in 20, 30, 40 years. So it keeps increasing over time as we move closer to the actual payout of those benefits. Now, on the income statement is where it starts to get more confusing, because if you look at what happens and the typical presentation, you do see the service cost and the interest cost. Both those are pretty self-explanatory, but you do not see the actual return on plan assets. Instead, companies try to smooth it out by recording an expected return on plan assets. Obviously, this is going to be quite different from the actual return in most cases. And so to account for this, they also amortize that difference over time. So if their expected returns differ from their plan returns, you will see an amortization line related to that. And then you'll see all sorts of other adjustments as service costs and plan details and other things like that change. The bottom line is that pretty much everything related to pensions on the income statement is a non-cash expense or a non-cash income source, which means that on the cash flow statement, we reverse all of those and then we deduct whatever the company actually contributes into its pension plan to pay for those future obligations. I think the most confusing part of all of this is that there's no specific line item for pension payments to employees, because when a company pays employees in retirement, that payment reduces both the pension asset and the pension liability. So I'm going to bring up a separate Excel file to illustrate this. This is something that we use to teach the concepts of equity value and enterprise value. If I record something for pension payments to employees, say 100, there's nothing on the cash flow statement for that specific line. Instead, all that happens is on the balance sheet, the defined benefit pension assets decrease and the defined benefit pension liabilities also decrease, so the changes cancel out and there is no net cash flow impact. Now, there may be some type of deferred tax impact depending on the country and what is deductible and what's not deductible. We're not showing that here. When you get to the DCF, there is a really good article from the footnotes analyst here describing different ways to deal with pensions in a DCF. It's quite technical and assumes some pretty advanced knowledge, but I do recommend reading it if you're interested in this topic. They have a table with all sorts of different treatments and different ways you can go about accounting for pensions in a DCF. But the bottom line is that the simplest way to do this is to deduct the service cost in the unlevered free cash flow calculation, add it back as a non-cash expense, and then deduct the tax-adjusted net pension liability in the enterprise value to equity value bridge at the end, which really is pretty much what we're already doing in these valuation multiple calculations. We are factoring in the net unfunded pension liability here after the 1 minus tax rate multiplication. And then we're making sure that the service costs are deducted in EBIT, but not any of the financial components. Now, in the footnotes analyst article, they also recommend this approach with WACC, where you adjust it. So normally you take the cost of equity and multiply by the percent equity, the cost of debt multiplied by the percent debt times 1 minus the tax rate. They're suggesting separate components for the pension liability and the pension asset, where you can take the percentages of these and you can estimate the cost of them and factor them in. So the cost of the pension liability will increase WACC, whereas the cost of the pension asset will reduce WACC. And you could certainly do this. In some cases, companies actually disclose their expected returns on pension plan assets. So you could use these for the cost of the pension plan assets, and then you could find the interest rate they're using for the pension plan liabilities, for example. To be completely honest with you though, I have looked at over 1,000 bank presentations and valuations over the years, and I've very rarely seen these types of adjustments. Part of the issue is that if you really think about the formula, unless the company has a massive unfunded pension, these components are probably going to offset each other and cancel out a little bit, so there may not be a huge difference. Also, it can be difficult sometimes to figure out what the proper cost is, so you don't necessarily see this used in real life all the time. Some people will also argue that you should adjust the pension liability and asset if the company's assumptions are unrealistic. For example, maybe they think that their employee salaries will grow by 2% per year, but actually other companies are increasing them by 3 or 4% per year. And so in that case, the liability should increase because the payouts upon retirement will be higher. These points are important mostly if the company has a massive pension and a pretty large unfunded portion, and neither one of these is especially common today. Even if you look at Michelin, a pretty old school manufacturing company in France, notorious for generous retirement payments and pensions, the unfunded pension is less than 10% of the company's total enterprise value. And so even with a company like this, these adjustments tend not to make a massive difference. That's about it for pensions. Let's do a quick recap and summary now. So we started with the basic definitions and the simple way to treat these. In other words, you go to the enterprise value calculation, you find the net unfunded pension, multiply by 1 minus the tax rate in most cases to add it. If the pension asset exceeds the pension liability, you just do nothing and don't count it here because it's not unfunded in that case. And then you have to make sure that any financial components here are added back and not factored into EBIT, EBITDA, and so on. So I showed you this example for Michelin. Then we said a few words about pension accounting, and I explained how the asset and liability and income statement and cash flow statement line items work. The bottom line is that on the income statement, virtually everything is non-cash, so you reverse it on the cash flow statement and then show only the amount the employer contributes into the plan. The pension asset and liability are affected by things like the actual return on plan assets, the service cost, the interest cost, and of course the benefit payments to the employees. In a DCF, the simplest thing to do is to make sure that unlevered free cash flow deducts the service cost, and then in the enterprise value bridge to make sure that it deducts the net unfunded pension after the tax adjustment. You can also potentially adjust WACC and maybe even the asset and liability themselves, but we only recommend doing that if the pension is quite significant for the company. That's about it for this topic. Hopefully now you know a little bit more about pensions and how to deal with them in enterprise value and valuation multiples.